Chris, the Moth seems really, really technical, but people are still getting into it in droves. What advice have you got for people who want to get into the Moth for the first time? What should they be looking for with the kit they buy firstly?
People ask me this all the time, and generally people come to me and say, I've got a budget of say £5,000 or £6,000, and truthfully £5,000 or £6,000, just you're going to be very lucky to find something, that people obviously don't know what they've got if they are selling a good boat for that. So for me, my top advice is to buy a well-known boat, such as, if you can find one, an Exocet or a Mach 2. The other option is buying a Rocket or a very recent Ninja. So for me, trying to spend, it sounds silly, but trying to spend as much as you can on a boat. Really invest in the boat itself, because trying to learn on an old boat or trying to learn to tack and jibe, as I say, on a new boat, on an old boat, is very difficult. Whereas the new boats are much better set up, and you're much less likely to break it, and your learning time will be significantly shorter. So
realistically, what's your minimum budget to really get involved?
I think now it's probably sort of between £10,000 and £12,000, which it's a lot of money. But if you go out there, you sort of a Musto is probably £10,000 or £11,000 a new one, and you can pick up quite a nice second-hand Mach 2 for sort of similar money. So it's a lot, but it's kind of the minimum you can really spend these days to get a good boat.
Yeah. And the waiting list for the Exocet, it always blows me away to hear this. Do you know what it is these days?
I think it's late 2018. I don't see that time frame coming down. Obviously it depends on how the Exocets perform again at this Worlds, but I would expect at least one of us to be in the top three, if not a couple of us to be in the top three. So I think it's unlikely it's going to come down. I know that Bora Galari, 2 times world champion, took delivery of his, or has taken delivery of his recently this week, and he ordered his boat sort of around or before the Hailing Worlds in 2014. So we had quite a big rush after that Worlds, where I finished second, and people went out and ordered the boat. So since then, I think Simon's been Simon Maguire, who builds and owns Maguire Boats. He's been on the back foot trying to get them out the door.
Yeah. Okay, so you bought your boat. It's a reasonable second-hand boat, let's say, and you want to start learning to sail it. What are some of the do's, and maybe more importantly some of the don'ts, to make sure that you keep mind, body and equipment in one piece as much as possible in the early days?
I think a big do is pick the right conditions. So don't expect to foil in less than 7 or 8 knots minimum for your first day. It's easy to go out there and get frustration and think you can't foil the boat. If the conditions are right, anyone can sit on the side and make it foil, for even if it's a few seconds. So pick a day between say 8 and 12 knots and try and go to a reasonably flat water location. Definitely easier for learning how to foil. So that's a definite do. I think the major don't is just don't go out when it's too windy. Don't put yourself in a position whereby the boat is going to be in charge of you rather than you being in charge of it, and especially for your first couple of days, because you're likely to break it, you're likely to maybe injure yourself and maybe not have a good time, and it's all about having fun. So yeah, just pick the right conditions.
And in terms of setup, these boats, when they're set up correctly, they do an awful lot of the foiling and the sailing for you. Is that correct?
My boat is a dream to sail. It can sail it in conditions that you just can't sail, boats that are twice as long and twice as wide in. And for me, having an effective control system and a foil on a boat is for sure the way forward. It's the way forward for our sport, and it's you're not being affected by the waves in the way that you are when you're actually in the water. So for me, it's significantly easier for me to sail a Moth downwind in 20 knots than it is for me to sail any sort of high performance skiff or even a short catamaran.
So if you have the benefit of being around similar Moth sailors, say at Stokes Bay or something like that, then great, someone can go up and ask you or one of the other good guys what to do. But if you're sailing on your own and you want to get some sense of how to set the boat up, where do you turn to for advice? How do you know when it's right?
I think every boat, truthfully, is a little bit different. If some of the push rods are a little bit different length or a slightly different angle of attack on the foil, and there's lots of other variations, so it's incredibly hard to say, oh, you put this exactly here, you turn the reel, for the bias exactly this much, or you have the wand exactly this length. It's not an exacting thing. It's every boat is a little bit different. Every boat requires a slightly different setup, as it were. We're talking slight here. But so it's very hard to get that exact information. But the Moth class, just after the Hailing Worlds in 2014, commissioned Bo Outridge and his brother Nathan to put a series of videos together, which are on YouTube. Basic rigging, basic launching, tacking, jibing, etc. And they're very helpful. And ultimately, it'll kind of give you a good idea of what you're looking to achieve.
Excellent. And presumably there's also a bit of a risk and reward in terms of how you set the boat up. You can set it up to be a little bit more on the edge, provided you have the skill to deal with it. But are there some things that when you're starting out you can sort of back off on a little bit? Yeah,
sure. I mean, the better you get, the higher that you fly the boat out of the water. And ultimately, the higher you fly it, the faster you will go. It's certainly downwind anyway. So you quite often see people when they first jump in their boat foiling around as high as I would, or even higher, and they're crashing all the time, and they don't know why, and they think they're just learning, and ultimately they've got their boat set up a little bit wrong. So just don't try and fly the boat too high. Put some lines on the foils, try and make sure the strut depth is at least your 500 mil sort of minimum, really, whereby you've got the main foil at least 500 mil lower than the wood surface, roughly.
And just briefly, tell us, why is higher faster?
Well, it's less drag. The higher you can get up, the less drag you've got. I mean, it's a bit like going downwind in a skiff. The faster you go, the more of the hull that leaves the water, the faster you go. I mean, the more the foil that leaves the water, the more strut you can get out of the water, the faster you'll go. It is marginal in terms of speed, but if you fly the strut, say 300 mil lower, it'll be the equivalent of a couple of knots of boat speed downwind. Obviously, that's quite an extreme case. Normally, everyone is sort of quite close to the sort of 20, 30, 50 mil are different. We're not talking big differences in speed and over that much strut difference.
And there's no limit to how long the struts can be, is that right?
No, there's no limit to the struts, but there's an optimum really in terms of heel angle and strut in the water. The longer you make the strut, the more windward heel you could put on, but then you've got more strut in the water, which is more drag. So I mean, I did have a conversation with Kevin, and I think he had a conversation with Adam May years back about what the optimum strut length was. And I think, to be honest, the Moth class being a development class and being the way that it's gone, we found the optimum strut length purely by experimentation and development time.
Right, so it is self-limiting to some extent.
Within reason. Yeah. I mean, you can have a really long strut, as I say, and the boat is super safe. The foil is never going to come out of the water. You can sail over huge waves, but you've just got a lot more strut in the water, which is slower. So it really is a compromise.
Now, just coming back to the theme of getting started in the Moth, some of the top guys, yourself included, you have multiple choices of different foils to use for different conditions. If budget is an issue, what's your advice on that?
I had one of the local guys at Stokes Bay here was, when he bought his Mach 2, was advised to buy a small set of foils for it, because ultimately they're a bit faster, and when you're good at sailing it, you can get away with sailing on the small foils a little bit longer. But it's, he doesn't go out when it's particularly windy, and he sort of struggles to get on the foil when it's light, when it's sort of good conditions for him to be learning in. So for me, my top advice is to make sure that you've got a big set of foils or a large set of foils on your boat, something that makes it easy for you to get on the foil, easier to tack, easier to jibe, so you can learn all the skills before you put them under pressure with a smaller set of foils.
Great tip there. Thanks very much, Chris.
Cheers.